we're here with AEG's new game, Ecos First Continent. This is from John Clare, who also did Mystic Vale and Edge of Darkness, two very popular games. However, in this one, instead of magic, we're really asking the question, what if the Earth formed differently? This game is all about you are sort of nature spirits and you're all working on this first continent to see what it looks like, but only one of you will be the true winner.
You are playing to a number of points, 60 or 80, depending on if it's a short or a long game, and turns take place simultaneously. So one player will be the Harbinger, and they get this bag. It sounds very ominous, but it's not that ominous. And they're going to draw one tile from here, or two in a two-player game, and reveal it. And that symbol is going to align with different symbols on players' cards that they have in play. You're going to start with a number of cards, perhaps a set number of cards if you're playing a basic game, or you may draft to have some more variety, a little more challenge if you're more experienced. And if you have the symbol, so for instance here's grass, and if you have it on one of your cards, then you would take one of your cubes and cover that symbol up with that cube if you want to. Eventually, if you manage to fill up the entire set of symbols on that side, then on your turn you will call Eco, and when everyone's ready, starting with the Harbinger and then going in player order, you'll activate any of the cards that you filled up that way on your turn. If you're unable to place a cube because you don't have that symbol, or if you just don't want to, it's not useful for you right now, each player has this little tile here. And instead of placing one, you can rotate it. And if you rotate it to a certain point, they will offer you different abilities. You could gain a new cube, for instance, gain a card, or play a card from your hand. So that could all be very useful, maybe even more so than adding something to one of your cards. You'll keep doing this, the Harbinger, drawing new tiles from the bag until each player has gone a number of times, and you'll see a bunch of tiles like this, could be more, could be less, until eventually they draw the wild symbol. Now this could be anything. Each player gets to decide what they want to interpret it as for their own use. There are only two of them in the bag, however. You can see here is the distribution of all of the tiles. Once the Harbinger draws that, then the Harbinger moves on to a new player. The reason that's important is because the Harbinger gets to carry out their ecos first. So if there is a conflict, if multiple people activate cards at the same time, you might really want to go first to make sure they don't mess with you in any way.
Luckily, there is actually a rule in there. Let's say you're all doing ecos and Jonathan, let's say, as the Harbinger, changed the board in a way that makes mine not useful and not work anymore. You can sort of take it back and rotate your dial instead. Now, let's actually get to these cards, because that's really where the board's going to be messed around with. They come in two colors, the blue-green ones, and the ones they call brown, we like calling orange.
Red, orange, something like that.
These tend to mess around with the board more. Well, these are actually about scoring the points. So these are more your endgame cards you're going to worry about when this is more of setting them up. Now, most of them will just either be placing tiles. There's water, land, or desert. There's placing mountain or tree meeples. There's also placing animal tokens, which you can see come in these nicely divided token bins. Now, they all have different reasons for you applying them, because there'll be cards that might say the predators might actually eat some of the animals. You can sort of guess what the predators are. They'll actually have a red border. These usually mean they mess around with other players' plans a bit more. There's also gaining points for habitats and biomes, so trying to put trees together, or maybe trying to keep things small. So there's a lot of different ways you can mess around with the board that way. And of course, animals can move as well, and they have preferred habitats where they spawn. But other than that, a land animal likes to stay on land. A sea animal likes to stay in the water. The other thing cards can do, they can give energy. This is especially helpful. For example, that deer symbol only is 2, just like the wild, so it's very hard to come by. So a card that gives you that can be very useful. However, if you notice there's leaf symbols on here, that's the number of times a card can be activated. Because each time you do it, you rotate it, and once you use it, that in this case, the 4th time, this card goes away. Not all of them are 4 uses. Some of them are like 1 or 2. So you gotta make sure you plan when you want to use them. You can't just spam them all whenever you want. Yeah. So that's basically the game. You're going to keep going. 60 points for a shorter game, 80 for a longer. The board we just set up a board randomly, but maybe you're going to start trying to go for a long water stretch, but then someone could close it off.
Yeah, a lot of things can happen. It's a very interesting game because you have all this board space obviously over here and you're affecting it, but you're also doing things with your own cards and what tiles are coming out of the bag. So you kind of are managing two different spaces, your own abilities and your own combos you're trying to pull off versus this, which is like a whole other game almost, but they can heavily affect each other, of course.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then, what your opponents are doing. Maybe you have a card that's really helpful if you put lions lions out, but maybe they have a card that, I don't know, they want a lot of water out in the field, so they're not going to help you get any places to put lions out.
No, then there's cards that'll swap tiles. So let's say I knew you had a thing that the lion can move and eat creatures. I could then swap it over to maybe a tile over here that isolates it from other animals.
Right, yeah. No real direct aggression or hostility towards other players, but by way of doing those things, you can definitely ruin other people's plans, or sometimes inadvertently help their plans.
That is true. You may have a card in hand that gets a lot of points for having for each grass tile in a habitat. And maybe it's still in your hands, so your opponent doesn't know, so they're just stacking those grass tiles over there.
Right, right. And that's one of the other things is there's a lot to take in. Like you can see right here, each of us have like 5 cards.
Absolutely.
You could end up with 10 of these by late
and then
game.
You have to decide whether you want to play a card, get more cubes, because you can only cover cards with a number of cubes. So you only start with 7, if I recall.
Yeah, you start with 7 cubes.
But I might have, 5 of them on here. You are allowed to take them off, but then you're like, I just need 1 more to trigger this.
Right, yeah. So managing where you put those is also a valuable skill to learn. And then keeping track of what other players have on their field. Like there's a lot to look at. And early on, definitely when we first started playing, I felt a little overwhelmed with remembering what does each icon, where do I have it, and how do I know, like, this is one whole card. There's a lot of things
Honestly,
that happen.
I'm still a little bit overwhelmed at times with this game because there's a lot to go with, because there's almost just like, I got to manage my own thing, and then you got to keep careful because we keep bringing the line up. And I don't see any of these predator cards are really scary because they're usually also the ones that score a lot of points for eating up other animals. So if you have the animal strategy, they're going to probably ruin your day.
Yeah, the animals, anything like that can be really temperamental. Like between games, things can vary a lot based on what cards people have, what's on the field. There might be a strategy like these mountains or trees, maybe nobody has a tree card and you might just never see them. Or there's a lot of different animals that you might not see. So, and a ton of different cards too that you're definitely not going to go through all these in the deck. So that is one thing. There's definitely a ton of variety in the types of strategies that you're going to have.
I really appreciate that they have these sets to just start off with, because you can be like, all right, here, you're just getting that set. And in a 2-player game, they actually say, for combination, you probably want like the monkey foot versus the dandelion or something. They have different versus combinations that they feel are a bit more balanced, which I think is you want a bit more in a 2-player game since it's more head-on. But the drafting, once you play it once, the drafting is a lot of fun because you can like, all right, my first cards, I got a lot of tree cards in here. So I'm going to take some of those, so I know I'm going to do a lot more tree stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a little more rewarding and lets you hone that more, because even when you do that, but sometimes if you don't, it can happen where the things that you want to trigger just don't trigger.
Right.
And that can be frustrating. But on the other side, it can feel really good because sometimes you might have a card that will give you a symbol, for instance. And sometimes if you use them correctly and wisely, you could pull off activating like 3 or 4 ecos cards like in one turn.
Right. For example, getting enough sun gives 2 water here, which you can put on another card that uses 2 water, can trigger and place a landscape, which maybe give you a resource if it's next to other things.
Yeah, so there's some really cool like effects like that. I guess like a Rube Goldberg, not quite, but
it has an engine building aspect to it. It's just,
yeah.
I think compared to other ones, there's so much going on. It's just hard to keep track of everything, especially your opponents. You may forget that they played a card that does thing, and you're like, all right, I'm fine. I want to get these 3 tiles to get a difference. Austin Johnson's like, because he's not even trying to block me. He's just,
right.
Yeah, I'm just going to put this in. You're like, no.
Right. Yeah, that can definitely happen. Now here are our crits and misses for ecos. Crits. There is a huge variety of cards in the game, which means that you have many different strategies to choose from. Whether you're focusing on animals or the different terrain types, you have a lot of different ways to build your engine and pull off some satisfying combos.
Not only is there a lot of interesting variety in tiles, meeples, and animal tokens, there's also the fact that there's a good chance your opponent may be using some of those as well. This means you may think you can score a reasonable amount of points, but if your opponent's also adding those to the field, you can get a lot more.
Turns are played simultaneously, so while there are a lot of different things to keep track of at one time on the field, everyone is doing it at the same time, which helps speed things up, and generally, you are working together in a sense on the same shared field, which keeps things interesting.
Most of the analysis process that can occur in this game will happen when people are placing their cubes after the Harbinger draws an element tile. This means that you're all sort of doing it at the same time, so that helps cut down on the play time so you can focus more on actually making your world instead of waiting for that one player to decide whether he's going to put the sun on card A or card B.
It's nice to have pre-established sets of cards, but for experienced players, the drafting mechanic is very rewarding and can help you build your engine up as soon as the game starts.
Like we said with our first crit, there is a lot of different strategies for you to follow. So drafting is really fun in deciding what path you may follow, which can differ from game to game. Misses. There's a lot going on in this game, and honestly, the word fiddly is a bit of an understatement. You'll have to keep track of your own cubes, putting them on the right cards, rotating them for uses, putting an order of ecos, which can chain, and not even taking the fact your opponent's also going to be doing that and messing around with the board as well.
If you're new to the game or you're not someone who's really strong at keeping track of what everyone's doing at the same time, you may have some difficulty adjusting to how much there is on the table and remembering which of your abilities you should activate and when, let alone your opponent's.
The randomness of drawing elements from the Harbinger bag can be a little annoying, whether it's not drawing the element that you desperately need to finally trigger that card off, or if you are the Harbinger and you draw that wild token on your first or second draw. More often than not, you're usually sort of helping each other and building the center board with your different card abilities, but occasionally you may have a card out that really focuses on, for example, water, and just no one is building water, which means you're going to have a hard time making use of it.
Fortunately, you will be drawing more cards as the game goes on, so you can change your strategy partway through, but sometimes if you start with a hand of cards that's just not useful for you, it can be pretty frustrating.
This game has a lot going on with it, and I think, unfortunately, that's where my biggest issues with this are. It's sometimes really hard to just keep track of everything, and just trying to keep your own strategy up can be really difficult because you're just trying to find out what elements to trigger cards, and you're like, I just really hope I can get these desert tiles to make that thing until someone screws it up by placing their own tile. Not because they're actually trying to stop you. They're also just trying to do their own thing.
I think one of my biggest things was these cards and the way the leaves are drawn on them, because this is 4 leaves and that's 3 and that's 2 and 1.
But that looks like 2 separate.
Yeah, when I first looked at it, I'm like, this is 2, then 1. Little things like that they could have made clearer. I will say that, I agree there's definitely a lot going on, and that's kind of my problem with it too. But as the game goes on, I'm the kind of player who I'm probably not even going to attempt to understand what my opponents are doing. So I do think after you get a couple games under your belt, it does get easier and you'll understand what you're doing better. And in spite of those issues, I did have a really good time playing the game.
I think no, it's just there is some fun you can have with it. It's just sometimes it just can feel almost unbelievably taxing. We just, like I said, not even just trying to be like, what can my opponent do during their turns versus mine? It's just, what can I do? Because if I don't draw a sun tile, obviously I'm not triggering this, then I can't trigger this, and just...
Yeah, you kind of want to like have maybe you want a variety of icons, but even then, like you said, like remembering what all these cards say, it's a lot, because they're not like, they're mostly text. It's not, which is nice because at least you can read it, but sometimes there is iconography and you forget what that means. So, I mean, I would definitely recommend this to people if this sounds like something up your alley.
I think it fits a niche. I just think if you're definitely more on the beginner side of board games, this might be one you want to wait on.
Yeah, or at least give it a few games before you know you really have a handle on it, that kind of a thing. But we've certainly played games that are worse, in my opinion, in the department of a lot of things to keep track of.
True. I mean, it just takes a while to sort of get to the groove of it, I think, in this one for me.
Yeah, I think part of it that helps me is that the minute-to-minute gameplay of like just pulling out a thing, of seeing where you put it, is not too cumbersome. It's really just remembering what everything is. So if you kind of just take it one step at a time, it doesn't, maybe to me, I guess it didn't feel as taxing as maybe it did for you, who maybe your brain is firing in a different way than mine is. But still, I don't know, give it a shot or don't. Let us know what you think. If you have already played it, once the game is available, you can let us know in the comments down below. And we'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what strategies you employ, how you feel about the different elements of the game, etc. Until next time, thanks for watching. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Will.
This was a Roll for Crit review.
We would love it if you liked and subscribed to this channel and supported us on Patreon as well.
If you choose to support us, turn to page 25.